We have won this fight before.
Why is she the authority? She is a person who wrote a story about a wizard.
I feel like that's the story of every bisexual's life, where they don't feel gay enough and they have to like beef up their bi CV.
1 in 4 people thought last year's Bud Light saga was a reason to not do gay ever again.
Corporates say that they are raising awareness.
That gay people exist?
Welcome to the Media Storm studio. We are so thrilled to be joined by 2 special guests today.
Our first guest is the founder of QueerAF, an independent LGBTQIA plus publisher supporting queer creatives to build a media career. He is a journalist, award-winning digital media producer, and Forbes Under 30 recipient. He's been on Media Storm before, but he's back again. It's Jamie Wareham. Hi, Jamie.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Our second guest is a comedian and writer. She has won and been nominated for so many awards. We'd be here all day if we listed them all. But they include Best Newcomer at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, Best Show at Leicester Comedy Festival, and a Writers Guild Award for Best Radio Comedy. You may have seen her on Mock the Week, QI, House of Games, Live at the Apollo, and so much more. It's the wonderful Olga Koch. Welcome to the studio. And also, I feel like important to say, my mate.
Yeah! Big time. We have each other's phone numbers and everything.
At my wedding, like, one of my friends said, I just shouted at the comedian Olga Koch out of my car. Did you?
I vaguely remember this.
Okay, yeah. My friend Adam shouted, I love you, Olga, out of his car. Just to let you know.
Oh, and I love Adam. I love him right back. It was a wedding full of love.
It was. Okay, anyway, we're not here to talk about my wedding, although that could fill an hour podcast. We're here to talk about Pride Month. And more importantly, how we can extend Pride Month beyond the month.
First up, how do we know that it's Pride Month? Is it because LGBTQ plus voices and rights are uplifted? Is it because queer culture is celebrated? Or is it because the biggest corporate brands have changed their logo? Sorry, I'm going to say that sentence again. Or is it because the biggest corporate brands have changed their Twitter logo to a rainbow?
I mean, corporate rainbow washing during Pride Month has long been a problem called out by the queer community. Who can ever forget the Marks and Spencer's LGBT sandwich? FYI, for those who don't know, the letters stood for lettuce, guacamole, bacon, and tomato. Or this year, in the States, Burger King released a burger with 2 bottom buns.
Well, how about that? Yesterday, I genuinely walked past the Deutsche Bank headquarters, and their big logo is rainbow, and they've like changed it to be rainbow, so I had to do a photo shoot in front of it, like the ally that I am.
Jamie, have you seen any?
Well, I think my favourite thing is when I get emails being like, did you know it was Pride Month? And I'm like, yes, as someone whose outlet is called Queer as swear word. It's just like, I'm aware. I am critically aware that June is a month for us. Thank you for your attention. Also, like, I get like a flurry of them at like 4:00 on like the 29th of May, being like, do you have anything planned for Pride Month? I'm like, funnily enough, yes. But actually, do you want to email me on July 1st and chat to me then? Because actually, I'm a bit busy. Yeah, it's quite a month. And also, like, I feel like with the Marks and Spencer sandwich, like, for me, the next thing is like, it needs to be like a quinoa salad, because they're still missing the Q out. So,
yes.
Still waiting for the expansion of that, frankly.
What ingredient would the I be?
Iberico ham.
Oh. Is Iberico ham the only food beginning with I in the world? Because I genuinely couldn't think of anything.
I know, I was like, ingredient? I don't know. Well, look, rainbow washing, also known as pink washing, is the marketing practice of using rainbow-themed symbolism in campaigns without any lasting or meaningful action to support the queer community.
What's interesting, though, is that this year, Pride Month is taking a hit, and data shows that as transgender and gay rights have become a conservative battleground, more and more companies are actually opting out of doing Pride Month at all. Take Bud Light as an example. Last year, Bud Light did a partner marketing campaign with transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney, sending her a personalised beer can. But this initiative caused a backlash from their trans-hating consumers who unfortunately responded with abuse, boycott threats, and videos of themselves machine gunning Bud Lights.
Well, in response, Budweiser backtracked faster than the speed of light. The CEO of Budweiser said they'd never intended to be part of a discussion that divides people. This sparked massive criticism, obviously, as the company was perceived to lack sympathy for Dylan amid the backlash. I mean, or did they just want Dylan for a diversity box tick? I mean, do they actually care about inclusion in their company? But I guess herein lies the issues. Like, if corporations are seeing a backlash from the queer community for rainbow washing, and if there's a backlash from the anti-LGBT people for celebrating Pride, are we simply just going to see less and less support for Pride Month? Jamie, maybe you could weigh in.
Yeah, I think the important thing that we like go into this conversation thinking about is like last year's Pride backlash was coordinated by like a handful of groups that are frankly like US right conservative Christian fundamentalist groups, right? And their like coordinated action created a much bigger impact than is reflective in like wider society. Like most people enjoy Pride Month. Most people enjoy buying rainbow products because it supports the community, albeit tangentially through kind of donations based in those kind of like Pride t-shirts or, cuddly monkeys or whatever it is that's being chopped out this year. Like, as a society, we love Pride Month and we love its intention. What Bud Light got entirely wrong is it didn't know what its intention was behind that campaign. It was just doing Pride because, well, it's June and in June we do Pride, right? It was like a Mean Girls approach to like a real issue that requires like a lot of depth and thought. And like the way that they should have done that campaign is like thought about the intention, thought about and planned for like a backlash, which happens every year and happens whenever you do something queer, because as you said, we're this like battleground in the conservative right. And then it should have stood by that campaign. And like the reason it should have done that is like when Nike has done stuff over the years, including around Black Lives Matter, and stood by that campaign, despite an initial dip in stocks and shares, over the long term, those campaigns have been shown to drive profits for these massive organizations. But in Bud Light's response, which basically panicked and went, oh, okay, we won't do the gay thing then, everyone hated Bud Light, and then their share price dropped dramatically, and no one was happy with it, like not even the Conservatives, because they'd already like upset them. So like if you're going to upset the Conservatives, like stick with that is basically my point. Like you really got to like understand it. And I think the thing that was like most disappointing as someone that like supports queer creatives in this space as well is like poor Dylan, who was just left to deal with the entire brash of the entire American and frankly global right, who were just at her doorstep with Bud Light, who are a massive corporation that have PR teams and organizations and HR that could have stepped in to protect Dylan, and didn't do that at all. Like she was completely left on her own. And I think that's like the biggest tragedy of that saga. It's that this poor, incredible influencer woman activist was just left to just deal with it all because they were like, oh, ugh, like panic. And I think that's like the biggest shame of that story.
Yeah, we can laugh at Americans machine cunning Bud Light, but that is actually fucking terrifying for Dylan. Jamie, I wonder though, is there any value to these corporate pride campaigns if that intention is there? You said that Nike's campaign delivered profit in the long term. Presumably that isn't the value, you really see. Is there a way for these corporations to really help the Pride cause during Pride Month?
I think what's really interesting about this question is it sort of changes year to year. Like I remember when I was like in college, obviously not that many years ago, but a few. And like it was a really big deal that corporates were going rainbow. But that was a huge victory. Like that was a really great thing at that time because they just hadn't done anything before. 15 years later, we're now in this conversation. It's like, what can corporates do? And I remember a couple of years ago during kind of Liz Truss's time as Equalities Minister, if we can all remember that far back, like she was like talking about like banning trans women from kind of single sex spaces, which is something that feels again around the corner at the moment. But what was really interesting about that time was 130 corporates all signed an open letter saying, don't do this, government. And the government changed its mind and rolled back those plans. So there's been moments even in recent years where corporates have really said, actually, we recognise the reports that we're constantly putting out, which is that diversity helps not only our workforce, but our bottom line. So actually they get this. They get that it's valuable. They just panic in these like really hot moments, which is why it's really important that we focus on like the coordinated action by a handful of people that are forcing them to shift in this way. Because actually when we reframe it and think about it like that, we realise that broadly speaking, they're really useful and powerful because, as we all know, money speaks and they have a great opportunity to shift governments, which is why Stonewall in its early days in the UK really focused on building up a corporate like alliance with them. And corporates give a lot of cash to LGBT projects that would not be able to run without it. Like, we would not have local prides all over the country, which are like really changing the hearts and minds in a way that the bigger ones don't necessarily do anymore. And that's incredibly like invaluable work. And so when they set the right intentions and match it up and spend time doing that work internally as well, so that like their internal attitudes match their like external messages, this is all incredibly powerful. And like, as someone that runs an ad-free outlet, like I do a lot of corporate bashing, so like caveat all of this with that, but like equally I see their part in like fixing the problem. And so, like we should be talking about like the right kind of corporate like engagement and pride, definitely, but we shouldn't be talking about no corporates. Like, that's a really like fine nuanced line. So yeah, they totally have a role to play. They just gotta sit down with us, listen to us, and get it right. And that's the bit that's missing.
Yeah, the critique isn't don't do it. The critique is do more.
Right.
Yeah, and do it better.
Like those like really misogynist men who like don't listen to anything a woman says, but like will take the same advice from a man. It's like the government are like not listening to the queer creatives, but they're like, oh, we'll listen to the corporates.
Yeah.
It's like that kind of, anyway, same thing.
If it works, we take it.
But what does make a successful Pride Month campaign then? Also, like, can you, like, as a consumer, can you, like, tell the difference between something that is rainbow washing or something that is, like, a genuine Pride Month campaign?
Oh my God, that's an excellent question. Oh boy. You're looking at me as if I know. Yeah, I think whatever elevates specific queer voices, like that's the first thing that came to mind. That if it's making Deutsche Bank or Deloitte look like they're gay, that doesn't really move the needle for me. But whether they're but let's say if they sponsor a music festival where they'll like, I don't know, showcase Chapel Roan, or I'll find out about queer creative as I've never heard of before, or they get to do work they didn't have the funding for, that to me is exciting.
Yeah.
What about, I gotta just see the photo I took earlier, actually giving some of the profits potentially generated by Pride marketing to organizations, foundations that support queer communities?
I almost feel like that is implied. Like, whenever I see that, I'm like, sure as hell, Target should be giving that money to a LGBTQ organization. Yeah. Otherwise, what are you doing even?
Yeah, I mean, is that when we see, a rainbow label on a company or on a product in June, does that necessarily mean they are giving profits? I don't think in all cases it does. I mean, sometimes corporates say that they are raising awareness, and raising awareness is enough.
That gay people exist?
Yeah. Yeah, hello. You're welcome.
What was the photo?
It was, I picked up some coffee beans earlier because it was a rainbow tin, and I was like, oh, this could be a great example for later, from a brand called Dazel Green. But then I saw that they give profits from every can purchase to the Albert Kennedy Trust, and that's not just a Pride Month thing, that's a year-long thing. And I thought, well, that maybe is what a successful Pride campaign looks like.
Yeah, I think Olga's right. Like, that's the like bare minimum of what a Pride campaign should do. Like, if some of the profits that you're making out of spelling, like doing this extra stuff, isn't going to queers, then like you're doing it wrong. But like for me, like a successful Pride campaign, like it's really easy to like tick the box of like, we've sold a cuddly rainbow monkey and 10% of the profits are going to a charity. Like, that's great. Like, tick, well done. Like, we'll take that cash. But what's much better is if the Pride campaign actually has a message. So I think it was like E45 this year that did a Pride campaign about like bodies and what different types of trans bodies need in terms of like care and love. And like the advert was about that, and then it was like, oh, by the way, these people use E45. That was way more powerful because it actually had a story and a narrative about what like queer people need from like broader society or broader needs. So I think there's like a really exciting opportunity to tell stories about queer people in advertising. Like, and as someone that is, again, usually very anti-ads, I'm maybe not the best person to be saying all of this, but like, actually, that's really powerful. And like, just think about, like, it does two things then. You're not only, like, selling your brand, but you're also, like, shifting the conversation forward. And I think that's the bit that corporates have a real power to do, because they are really good at advertising in a way that the LGBTQIA, like, third sector isn't always, because we're small and we're, like, under-resourced. But, like, corporates with massive agencies who understand storytelling, like, just think about how much power they have to shift things forward, and how cool it would be if they, like, did more of that. And also, they always win awards when they do it, so, like, I'm always a bit like, oh, you know this works for you, so just crack on.
And surely that's an opportunity also to hire and pay queer storytellers to design that marketing content for you.
I mean, took the words right out my mouth.
And you talk about messages and the messages corporates send. What message does it send when companies like Bud Light and Target retreat from their campaign?
Well, it normalizes what that handful of haters believe in, and it makes that conversation. And what happened last year, so you said it earlier, like, people have retreated. I think, like, there was one number that I saw about 25% of brands felt less able to do, or 25% of marketers felt like they shouldn't do something this year. Like, that's huge. That's 1 in 4 people thought last year's Bud Light saga was a reason to not do gay ever again. Like, that's bonkers after, like, 30 years of progress in this space for 1 year to make everyone go, ugh. So it's going to take, like, a decade. Like, I talk about this a lot, right? In the same way that around in the 80s, around gay men and the HIV and AIDS epidemic, like, it's taken us 40 years to get to a point where we're like, okay, gay people exist and we're kind of done with that fight, but like, we're focused on something new now. Like, the same thing's happening with trans people now. It's going to take decades to unpack this, like, and that's the thing that I don't think these corporates always necessarily are thinking about, right? They're making very quick business, like, marketing decisions, whereas the impact it has on an incredibly and increasingly vulnerable community is just huge.
The Pride campaign has taken such a knock lately. It feels like it's gone back in time sometimes, and there's no doubt that the media, the mainstream media, has had a huge hand in that, which is why we're here today.
When, as someone who was part of that community, the LGBT community, and then when you, like, first started doing comedy and you started talking about, like, your sexuality on stage, was that, like, something you really thought about, or was it something that you just decided to say?
It did take me a while. So I've always been openly bi. It's not been something that I wrote material for. So I'm, like, on my 6th show, and I will say for the first 3, I didn't mention it at all either way. And then when I did, it took me a very long time to arrive at material that I felt was authentic to my experience as a bisexual woman. And and I was, like, torn, because obviously I feel like that's the story of every bisexual's life, where they don't feel gay enough, and they have to, like, beef up their bi CV and then just sort of, like, overdo it. And but in reality, I wanted to be very authentic to, like, my lived experience, and that lived experience was that I had dated more men than I did women, and that was, we don't know whether that's because of heteronormativity or where I am at the Kinsey scale. It doesn't really matter why I am the way that I am. And that was something that I felt like felt like I had to say, partially because I knew that I never heard anyone talk about it. The only bisexuals I've ever felt very militantly 50-50. Yeah. And then also because I felt like maybe my queer friends will be like, the thing is, they never would, because I don't think they care, but I was scared.
Well, like, oh, why is she claiming to be queer?
Exactly. So the biggest fear is for someone to be like, well, I've only ever seen her with a boyfriend, so it's like she's doing it for the views or the attention or whatever. So it felt very intentional to come out and be like, I've mostly dated men, I am attracted to women, I have had experiences with women, that's where I'm at. And I think it took, like, a lot of experience and a lot of sort of psyching myself up to do it. But now when I do talk about it, I feel very strongly about, like, portraying an accurate representation of my bisexuality.
It sounds like you were almost more, I don't know if it was you were more nervous, or maybe you were just more conscious of hurting or offending the queer community by broadcasting, by being open about
at no point did I want to, like, appropriate that struggle or anything.
Yeah, but then, the homophobic people who could come after you for doing it.
As in,
were you not worried about that?
Oh, no, not at all. No, but because I am, like, I'm a completely straight passing person, so I would never want to, like, sort of appropriate someone else's struggle. Lots of demographic research is suggesting that more and more Gen Zs are identifying as bi, regardless of what kind of experiences they've had. And I think it would be like the bar to identifying as queer is lower. I genuinely think that's a good thing, because you should be able to try to do whatever the fuck you want, to dip your toe in, and that shouldn't scare you because you feel like you're sort of stepping on someone's toes, or that means that you have to like adopt this label or a lifestyle. You should just be able to try it out. And I feel like I guess me being okay with talking about my queerness is part of that. To be like, if you feel like kissing a girl, that doesn't have to mean anything. Just fucking do it.
Yeah. I also think that like everybody is bi.
I mean, yeah.
But
Disagree? Helena, the sexuality according to Helena.
Okay, conclusion, everybody's bi. Let's move on. No, but this is really interesting, because it does lead us into something that we want to talk about today, which is like a hot topic this Pride Month, which is that celebrities saying that they're queer and then setting the record straight, literally. This month, when doing the PR rounds for her lesbian dating show I Kissed a Girl, Dannii Minogue said the words, "I identify as queer in a weird way." And then cue all the gays getting really excited about a queer icon until...
Yeah, Dannii wrote in an Instagram post, "To clarify, I was not making an announcement that I'm a lesbian or queer. I'm straight and in a long-term hetero relationship." She said her words had been taken out of context. This whole saga taught me a new word I'd never heard before, which is queerbaiting, which, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is sort of incorporating apparently gay appeal into a brand to draw in gay and bisexual audiences while staying ambiguous about sexuality itself, I guess, to not, lose any homophobes from your audience, having your cake and eating it too. Am I getting that right?
Jamie's nodding.
Nodding.
Yeah. Oh my god, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it's like nothing new. It's been around forever, and hot guys who go on the front of cover of magazines have long understood this concept. So, yeah.
I mean, David Beckham being on the cover of Attitude and then saying nothing when confronted with the fact that he took a Qatari sponsorship.
Right, that's such a good example. Yeah.
You talked about how when you were open about bisexuality on stage, you were nervous about appropriating people's struggle. Do you think you could explain what that means, appropriating people's struggle? Because I think that says so much about why queerbaiting is wrong.
Oh, God. Well, I mean, generations of queer people before us didn't have the luxury of sitting around and being like, nah, kiss a girl, do whatever you want. Like, they would actually be persecuted for it. And so I think that's something that we owe to generations before us. And I also feel like that as a woman in comedy, I feel I owe so much to women who came before me and had to sit in green rooms full of men who would like grope them and, I don't know, blow smoke into their faces. So I think you have to be very sensitive around how much people had to sacrifice and fight for the comfort and almost like flippancy that you get to afford yourself today. And I think that whenever people are queer baiting, they're sort of they're not aware of the type of sacrifices and lifestyles that other people had to live in order for them to, I don't know, paint their fingernails and then frolic about and collect gay money.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about the term queer baiting, though, because I have had a lot of people say that term in itself is problematic, because we actually do not know whether someone is queer or someone is not. And, there is no way to tell that someone is or isn't queer. And I think that term does affect a lot of bisexual people who are in a relationship with someone of the opposite sex a lot, because, as you were saying before, it's like they don't feel gay enough. So is the term queer baiting problematic as well as queer baiting itself?
And then also part of me is like, I don't think anyone owes to tell you what they are. This idea that Harry Styles has to come on the record. It's like, it would be cool if he did, but also it's weird to expect your pop star to do that for you.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just feels like very weird to pressure a person into coming out.
Yeah.
I also find with anything queer, we all have a different take on what these words mean to us. It's a super fluid thing. If you look back at the history of the word queer, I always love this because people are like, oh, well, it was always a slur and then we reclaimed it. But actually, if you go back far enough, it was a word we created for ourselves that straight people claimed as a slur before we reclaimed it back. So if you go and do the proper history dig of all of these words, there's so much nuance in all of it. And with the Dannii thing, I always kind of think if people want to say politically queer, which I sometimes say for myself, or culturally queer, so long as there's what Olga was just talking about there, like this broader understanding of like the fight and the understanding of this. Like, if you've got the authority to talk about these things, then like, yeah, go for it. Like, the thing I would say about Dani is that definitely didn't get this right on this occasion, but like, she's a super queer ally. Like, out of the like celebs that show up and are like icons, like she turns up to the small charities and she records messages for them. And she was literally doing that this week, like a message around like how trans youth are loved. Like, so when an icon slips up, but actually they do the work, I can kind of forgive them. It's when like Katy Perry comes out and screws it up and then does nothing, right? It's like stuff like that. And that's the difference. Like, so like I can forgive Dani on this occasion, but like only because she cares and shows up and she gets it and she sits there and listens. And when we say we need you to do this, she goes, okay. And like that is proper allyship after all. So
Yeah, and I think something that's missing from the whole conversation or the media coverage or the corporate PR is education about that suffering, that struggle that Olga you described. I mean, I know when I asked you to say, oh, what do you mean appropriate struggle? You're kind of probably thinking, oh, it's obvious. But I think so many people have no awareness of the struggle that LGBTQ plus people have faced, not just today, but throughout history. And at the very least, during Pride Month, the media could commit to educating people about that. That should be something happening all year round. But what we see time and again are stories about discrimination, ongoing or historic, against LGBTQIA plus people not making the mainstream media. So something that we want to talk about today is the incredible reporting that has been done this month, not really in the mainstream, but by independent outlets like Queer as Fuck. I can say Queer as Fuck.
Yeah.
QueerAF. To bring these incredibly important stories to light.
The first story we want to focus on is this. NHS England is facing accusations of an institutional attempt to cover up a rising number of deaths among transgender youth waiting for its care in order to protect its reputation and because it is politically inconvenient. The initial accusations were published in a lengthy Twitter thread by Good Law Project KC Joe Morm, who's been on Media Storm Series 1. You can scroll back. Jamie, could you just run us through this story so that we understand?
Yeah, and I think what's scary about this story is I have been aware of these allegations for a really long time. But what's different about what's happened in the last week is John Leon spent a lot of time connecting the dots and doing, like, as he pointed out, a piece of really easy open source journalism, so long as you've got the resources to do it, that frankly, the Times, the Telegraph, the Guardian all used to be very well known for, but don't seem to be doing as much of anymore. And that's what's particularly like acute about this. But look, like basically what that kind of investigation found is that like in the wake of the Tavistock v Bell case, which was like a big case about a person who detransitioned and accused that young person's trans youth clinic of like forcing them to go down a route they didn't want to. They kind of shuttered the approach on kind of gender affirming care, so puberty blockers and hormones for trans youth. That case was actually overturned a year later, but those shutters were never opened again. So when that case came through, basically trans youth stopped getting any support or access for kind of gender affirming care, which lots of studies show kind of saves lives, prevents suicides. And so over a number of years, suicides on these waiting lists and in their care started to get reported. Initially in these like quarterly meetings at that clinic, they were reported as trans youth suicides. And as these two whistleblowers who kind of were part of this investigation spoke out within that organization, it became more and more clear that that was like an unuseful thing to be saying because it was politically inconvenient. And so over a number of years, the data went from reporting on trans youth suicides to reporting on trans suicides to reporting on deaths within gender care. And so there was this like deliberate attempt, or what looks like a deliberate attempt, to like obfuscate and like suppress that information from coming out. And in one of the things that the whistleblower kind of shared with Good Law Project is that, that there was literally an FOA request that attempted to find this information out as kind of community activists started to see it happening and started to see it. And in that internal document, it said that they decided not to disclose the trans youth suicides because it was politically inconvenient to do so. So that's kind of like quite a shocking omission
my
that's like
God.
tucked away.
Quite
But there was,
We're all holding
yeah,
back our reactions to let you finish, but oh my God.
But like literally that is such a like huge important story, and as you said before, like this is open source journalism. Like the investigation looks at public information and freedom of information requests, so like the data is there. Why did no mainstream media outlet think about picking it up? I mean, the mainstream media love writing about trans people, right?
Yeah.
Just not want to involve this.
Yeah, this week, Telegraph Times all had front page stories about, transgender, quote, ideology as a risk to kids. They justify that incessant reporting on the topic by saying they want to protect, this is about protecting children, and to not
Protects
cover
children.
the these rising suicides of children as a result of policy. It is not just negligent, it is
Deliberate.
cruel. It's cruel.
Yeah. And we're not just talking about like a handful of kids either here, right? Like this set of data finds at least 16, but that's the 16 that were reported to these services. There's probably many, many more. And even like 16, that's a lot of kids who we as a country have allowed to die because we've been spending too much time fighting about bathrooms and genitals. I just think it's really sad and upsetting, and particularly like critically, like when this thread came out, like I jumped on it as a journalist and I called the NHS and said, what are you going to say to these allegations, after doing some reporting around this area for a number of weeks? And look, it was a hot day when I was calling them up, but I spent on and off the phone with them, and eventually at 4:00, long past my deadline, they said, we've decided not to respond to this story. I think a slightly warm press officer probably said those words and probably shouldn't have, but like I thought that was quite striking that they gone, yeah, we're just not even gonna respond to you anymore.
And if it was picked up by mainstream, maybe they would actually be under pressure to form a response.
Sorry. It's really chilling. Sorry, I agree with all of you. It's just really chilling how much both the major parties in the United Kingdom are now sort of supporting transphobia. Mm-hmm. And like, I think this is something that I certainly came across, but I'm sure other people did. A telltale sign of like a right-wing viewpoint or talking point is talking about children, when it comes to abortion rights, right? When it's like fetuses, because this is like a voiceless group that you could just speak on behalf of, right? And then clutch your pearls and talk about only theoretically. And so when we talk about being scared for trans youth, we're not talking about individual people. They're not talking about individual people. They're talking about a voiceless demographic that will never, in their eyes, speak for themselves, right? So when you're talking about individual trans youths actually killing themselves, they suddenly become people and become real, whereas they are never actually spoken about as real people. They're talked about purely as theoretical, as like oh God, what is it called? A pawn. Sorry. Like a pawn in right-wing ideology. They're never real. They're not talking about real people. They want a voiceless demographic that they could use to push their ideology.
It's so astute. And then as soon as those children turn 18 and can actually stand up in the media and speak for themselves, they're shouted down, made out to be villains. They go from being voiceless, vulnerable children who we want to protect to, as soon as they have a voice, we don't want to hear it, shut up, you know?
And I mean, the voiceless nature of trans coverage in the press in the UK is, like you said, one of the biggest problems. I mean, a couple of days ago, I opened the BBC News app, and on my homepage is a headline and a picture of J.K. Rowling, and it says, J.K. Rowling accuses Labour of abandoning women over its stance on the rights of transgender people. Now, look, we all know that J.K. Rowling has some very strong anti-transgender opinions, if you want to call it that, and like a quick scroll down her Twitter feed, not that I'd recommend it,
brain
shows
rot,
that brain rot. Like, she is literally obsessed. She basically doesn't tweet about anything else. There's a really good podcast on this from A Bit Fruity with Matt Bernstein. The episode's called J.K. Rowling Spiral into Madness. It really shows how she's gone from basically just saying sex is real to like really deep radicalization. But anyway, my point being, like, this is what I opened on the BBC news app homepage. Why does it matter what J.K. Rowling has said about trans rights? Like, even putting aside what we, can be classed as like extremist views being put on a mainstream platform. Like, even putting that aside, like, J.K. Rowling is an author. Like, are we going to go around and interview every single, like, fantasy author about their opinions on 1% of the population? Like, it makes no sense, but we are so deep into letting other people speak for trans people that seems like normalize that. We normalize that now. Like, a headline today was, you know, Labour to speak to J.K. Rowling, to, like, take a meeting with J.K. Rowling. It's like, why is she the authority on trans people and even on women's rights? Like, why is she the authority? She is a person who wrote a story about a wizard. Like, I just...
No, it's true.
They're meeting Richard Branson about period care that same day, actually.
Yeah, her
Hearing everyone out.
Her Twitter feed has just become a newswire.
It's literally being like, okay, well, can you take a meeting with me about, like, I don't know, the environment? Like, I don't know much about it.
They
Like,
just have two hats full of names and issues.
And they like pull it out.
I can't not say this because I've literally just spent the afternoon yesterday with Mina Smallman, who totally, you know, separate topic, but Mina Smallman is the amazing pastor and mother of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman, two Black sisters who were murdered, you know, and their bodies were violated by police. And she's been speaking out very vocally about this ever since, about racism, sexism within the police, within society. And she was saying to me, she has never been sincerely invited to speak to any policymakers on this issue, no matter how much she has been putting herself out there and trying to help the system improve. She does not, and she's sure that race is a factor in that, but how mad is it that she wants that audience and doesn't get it? And J.K. Rowling tweets and gets an audience with policymakers about healthcare policy for transgender children.
It's nuts. And we normalize it. That's the thing. We normalize it. It's like when there's a story now about, you know, any sort of like trans issue, like I'm almost surprised if like the media outlet hasn't quoted J.K. Rowling. Like, that's the level that we've got to now, which is why it's so important that we have outlets like QueerAF who do not quote J.K. Rowling, among many other things.
And if you remember one of our previous episodes on transgender rights, we had sort of wanted to talk about a J.K. Rowling story at the time, but our two guests who, you know, were gender minorities said, actually, can we not? Because if our names even appear in a piece which mentions J.K. Rowling, we'll get attacked, we'll get targeted. So her getting the platform is actively depriving the platform from people affected.
Yeah.
And it speaks to like a wider cultural issue in the media and publishing and TV. Like, everything is filtered through how many Instagram followers you've got as to whether you're allowed to have a book or whether you can present a documentary, rather than, do you understand this topic? Are you an expert on it? And can you provide valuable insight? Like, it seems bonkers to me that like I've heard this story so many times and I've been at the front of it myself. It's like, where you've pitched something that's really valuable and they go, oh yeah, but there's not really a celebrity attached to it, so you know you can't have a podcast, no, you can't have a book.
Yeah.
And it just seems bonkers to me. Like, it's the same thing, right? Like, the reason J.K. Rowling is gone to all the time is because she drives clicks, and so much of the media relies on clicks and advertisements in order for it to run. And so we're just stuck in this like gross cycle, which is why when we set up, we were like, we're going to be ad free because it means that we're grounded to our community and serving it and creating journalism, because journalism used to be this really important part of our democracy. Like, it's supposed to play a role alongside charity, government. You know, we're supposed to be part of the sector, and we have been like eroded further and further down the line into this like entertainment zone. And like, I love entertainment, don't get me wrong, like I'm happy to sit there and watch Below Deck, but I also really want to understand information about my world so I can navigate it. And that part of journalism has been so crucially and critically lost. And what's really interesting is that people are desperate for it to come back. And that's why, like, when people like come and sign up for QueerAF, like, they're like, thank you for doing this thing that like I miss, and I don't understand why the rest of the media aren't doing it anymore. Like, and people want this journalism.
Agree.
I just need to make note that is the reel we need to cut.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
every time I kind of forget about the state of news, I got a wake-up call last week where I was Googling, I'm going to Glastonbury tomorrow, and I was Googling, oh, what's the weather going to be at Glastonbury? And then every single news outlet had a news story about it, and every news story was, it's too early to tell. And someone's there typing it out.
News.
This
is news.
What we're putting our resources into, literally. It's like those articles that are like, what time are like Green Day playing and where? And then when you click on it, they're like, Green Day have not announced the set time. It's like,
No,
okay.
please don't get me started during COVID.
No.
At the Standard, I was put on basically content production desk. I was writing, some 20 articles a day, and it was like, I was out there, the authority on everything. Guys, Aldi's new egg chair is released. It is the hot purchase of the summer. God, never even sat in an egg chair in my life.
Yeah.
All recycled from, Lad Bible.
Love Bible, yeah.
Okay, another story we want to talk about that is actually news is this. QueerAF has revealed leaked guidance used by NHS England showing over 6,000 children currently on the waiting list for the new Children and Young People's Gender Service are being invited for mental health assessments. And during these assessments, they're being advised to stop gender-affirming treatments, and their families are being advised that if they continue without, quote, appropriate care, however that's defined, they could face safeguarding referrals, which to me sounds like a threat of, losing their kids. So essentially the fear here is that young people could be forced to medically detransition. Jamie, could you tell us more?
Yeah, and I think what is particularly upsetting about this story, and so the Good Law Project leaked some of the information, and we chased up NHS England to find out if it was real or if it was maybe some kind of, often sometimes these documents get leaked and it was like, oh, it's a plan that some maverick created, right? And so when we got hold of them, we kind of went, right, let's go ask NHS England if they're real. And eventually they confirmed not only they were, but then we started to get letters from the parents and the young people showing that not only was it real, but it was already being rolled out. And this was, within a week of the CAS review, which was that really important and huge, and now largely contested for its problems with methodology, report into kind of trans youth care. And these letters, they're framed as your child is on the waiting list for a new service, which hasn't yet been created, even though the last one has already been shut down. And in the meantime, we'd like to invite you for our mental health support. So it's being framed as support for children and young families who are desperate, vulnerable, and have had their care completely closed with no opportunity of the new one even starting anytime soon. But what's actually happening at those appointments is an information gathering process to find out whether they are taking or using private healthcare. And alongside all of this story happening, the government, in their final hours, eventually banned private healthcare options for young people around puberty blockers. So basically, the process was about gathering a list of people that were using these services that they were then planning to ban so that they could then stop them or use these safeguarding kind of referrals and fears to prevent them from using them. So this, for me, it's really difficult to pinpoint a ministerial approach through all of this, but actually when you zoom out and connect all of the dots, it's very clear that there was a coordinated plan to put the CAS review together, to very quickly use it, and probably have given view of it to many people way before it was published, because this plan was already being rolled out just days after the CAS review. So there's been this broader concerted effort to clamp down on trans youth. Even though it's not even that bit of it hasn't really been in the headlines. And I just think that's really underhanded and also really duplicitous, right? It's nasty. It's a real state attempt. And this is the thing for me, for many people, medically detransitioning and being forced to do that is a form of conversion therapy, right? So-called conversion therapy. That idea that you can try and change your gender. And the CAS review is sort of suggesting to people that between the ages of 17 and 25 that they should consider whether their gender dysphoria is to do with autism or it's to do with ADHD or it's to do with mental health and depression, right? Which is conversion therapy. It's trying to find other reasons for your transness or your queerness. So there's this state level kind of attempt at forcing what is widely recognized, including by the UN, as a form of torture, to be forced upon a bunch of kids. And that, when you zoom out, really paints the broader horribleness of this approach. Like, supposed to be mental health support, but actually it's part of a plan to take life-saving drugs away from kids that, as we was just talking about, are at high risk of suicide.
And I mean, it's horrendous. And QueerAF did so much work to expose this story. I wanted to ask, like, did it get any pickup in the mainstream media?
Yeah, I thought this would be the sort of story that the mainstream media would be all over, albeit with their own spin. Like, look, finally the government is taking, control of this. Look, the government is finally doing this. I sent this around. I think I managed to get Pink News to pick it up, but even then it was a stretch over there because there are limited resources to cover news anymore. Like, no one was interested in picking this up. And the question, like, I remember speaking to one journalist who was kind of like interested but couldn't get it through their editor, basically. And they kind of said, yeah, well, it's like you just don't really quite have enough evidence. And then over the next 3 weeks, parent after parent after parent sent me emails with copies of these letters, with testimonies of what happened to these appointments, being told that they were facing safeguarding referrals. Like, I have so many emails and upsetting messages from kids in my inbox that often spoke to me with their parents' permission, with their parents looped in, telling me just how scared and upset by the world they are. Like, it feels like quite a lot of evidence to me, particularly if 6,000 people have got this letter, which I know they have because I've seen so many copies of it.
Jamie, that is a lot for you to have to shoulder, as a individual journalist going against the grain, handling those accounts, upsetting accounts, I'm sure, by yourself, without them. I mean, are you okay? How do you manage?
Yeah, so I have to say, when I spent the day calling NHS England to try and find out if this thing was real or like a Maverick's plan, I was kind of expecting them to be like, oh, it's not real. By the end of the day, it's not real. And then like they confirmed it was real. And I spent the next couple of hours, changing my story and crying a couple of times. I kid you not, like it was very upsetting. And then it was released the next day. And I really thought it would come out the next day and I would get a call from someone at the NHS press office saying, oh, we got that wrong, actually. Like, you're going to have to take your article down. Like, that's absolutely not right. But that's not what happened. Instead, I got email after email from parents. And so it was upsetting because as a journalist, when you're exposing this stuff, like, usually you have this like Teflon layer of like, well, it's news, so you just have to kind of detach from it. But this is like a different level of attack. And I think this is what I've been really struggling to communicate more broadly, like not just to my audience, but like outside of that space, that these attacks on our community, they're not thematic, they're not rhetoric, and they're not even really culture wars. These are like really visceral and in many ways violent because of the deaths they're leading to, attacks on us. And I'm not sure we as a community have quite worked out just how much under attack we are. And I often look at, like, I remember being in Hungary and in Budapest on a press trip around the time that Orban was talking about immigrants and homeless people, and speaking to a lot of the very privileged gay white guys that lived in that town, them going, oh, they'll never come for us. And I remember leaving that press trip thinking, like, it's only 30 years that they've had democracy in that country. Surely they remember the attacks that happened there. And like 3 months later, I was writing about Viktor Orban banning like same-sex couples from adopting kids or having families and leading this traditional thing. And I look at, like, I zoom out on the UK and I think, gosh, we're actually past the point that I was looking at Hungary and thinking, why aren't they realizing? Like, and trying to communicate that to people is really difficult because we're so stuck in culture war land that we can't like see the wood from the trees. So like the like only saving grace of like hopefully a Labour government of the next 5 years is that they just don't do anything for a really long time to give our sector a chance to just breathe and work out how we get back on the foot. Because and I saw a great video of Nancy Kelly speaking at the Dyke March at the weekend, and she said it's going to take 10 years to unpack all of this, and she's absolutely right, if not more. And in the meantime, like, we've got to get back to our radical queer roots. We've got to be out on the streets. We've got to be angry. We've got to be pissed off that this stuff is happening. And like, it's all well and good chatting about like rainbows and corporate washing. But you know what? Like, I'll take a rainbow logo if that means we can focus on fighting for our rights again, because I just think that people are forgetting that we're these like awesome humans that bring so much to the country and to businesses and to families. And, yeah, it's scary out there at the moment.
Credit to you though, and the fact you are getting those emails as soon as you publish a story in an independent outlet shows that there are parents, families, children out there who are begging for their stories to be told, and whom our mainstream media isn't serving for all the content they're putting out on this topic. They're not serving
Absolutely.
that community.
And like when we talk about kids as well, like no kid should deserve to go through the pain and anguish that so many queers of us, like, sure, Olga, you can speak to this well, right? Like we grow up in a world like thinking that the world hates us. Like no one should like grow up in a world thinking that you're hated. Like that's horrible for kids. Like kids deserve to like have happy youth and to live in safe families and go to school and not get bullied, right? And that's what I always find really interesting about what the right's saying. They're actually saying all of that, but they then caveat it with their own like moral panics, which induce the very thing that they're purport to be fighting against.
Yeah, it's a very somber, sad end to this episode.
Maybe we can, look forward to next week's election and give something people maybe to act on.
Yeah, exactly. We always like to talk about, solutions-focused journalism. So with the general election next week, I wondered, do you have any thoughts on party positions on LGBTQ plus rights for people, for whom this is a voting priority?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Either of you.
Oh, God.
Either of you.
From my understanding, when it comes to, and I don't know if I want to keep this in, but when it comes to trans issues, both Labour and Conservatives aren't looking great.
No.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both using it as like a issue to attract a very certain type of voter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I'll say.
So don't vote for anyone.
There are other options, I guess.
I would say like when it comes to the election, like it's really important that we as queer people show up and vote, like however that is. Like even if you feel so disillusioned you have to spoil your ballot, but there are good options out there. Like the Lib Dems and the Greens have got some positive manifesto points, as to kind of Plaid and the SNP. Like there's progressive, exciting stuff going on in these parties that are like prepared to have a conversation about it, like whether that's kind of self-ID or introducing non-binary passports. Like there's some great policies out there. And like with Diva at QueerAF, we've been doing this kind of like queer election watch. So like if you're looking for like a quick TLDR of that, we've got that all covered. But the thing, like I would say in terms of like particularly ending on a hopeful note, coming into an election, is we have won this fight before. Like we won it after the papers went after us in the 80s around the HIV and gay panic. Then we won that fight, and because of that fight, I'm able to run a media organization that's called Queer as Fuck. Like I'm able to do that as a gay man because of my elders. We have won gay liberation before. We have won queer liberation before, and we will win trans liberation. We just need to learn from those lessons from our past, apply them to now, and just recognize that although it's really crap at the moment, and we've done a like 2 steps backwards kind of moment, in the next 10 years, we're going to take 5 steps forward, and things will be better, and we'll be looking after trans youth. And in the meantime, us queers, we just got to do what we do best, which is like create safe spaces for ourselves, do things because the system won't provide, and then go out and, listen to Cher and all that other stereotype.
Oh my God,
stuff.
can I vote for you?
I know, goosebumps.
Olga's literally crying.
The second you said we had won this fight before.
Oh my
God.
Oh my God.
It's true.
It's true.
Exactly. Burn it onto your mugs. Stick it on your Alexa. Like do whatever you got to do to get yourself up in the morning, and then I'll see you at Margate Pride.
Thank you for turning this around. And with that, I think we probably have to wrap up. Before we go, though, Olga, can you tell everyone where they can follow you, if you have anything to plug, any shows coming up?
My name is Olga Koch. You can find me on X, Instagram, Twitter, and on my website, rockandrollga.com, where all my gigs are as well.
Yay.
Amazing. Jamie, take us away.
Amazing. So you can find us at wearequeeraf.com, and I write a weekly newsletter to help you understand the LGBTQIA plus news so that you can skip the doom scrolling, because I do it all on your behalf. And the thing I would say, which is so wonderful about the Media Storm audience, is that they totally get that proper journalism is like an investment in time and resources. And the last time I was on the podcast, we had like a lovely surge in members that came over to us and signed up for like a monthly or an annual subscription to like help us do this work, which as a not-for-profit outlet, the only LGBT not-for-profit organization that's also regulated and not afraid to be regulated by Impress. That makes a huge difference to our work, which is actually not just about journalism, but is about investing in a new generation of queer journalists who can go into the newsroom and change it, which is my not so secret queer militant agenda. So if you're up for that, then yeah, head to our membership page.
Oh, that's amazing. That makes me so proud of our listeners.
Same.
And you mentioned Impress. We're actually having Impress on next week to look at election coverage. So thank you for the perfect future episode plug.